Well, you'd never hear a debate like this on the BBC. It is amazing. I mean, today I heard some of the comment. I didn't hear a single trade union comment. It was just bankers and people commenting upon it. And I think our most powerful weapon is education. It's not a surprise that it's come up in so many different forms, because if people knew what was happening, they wouldn't accept what was happening. So education is the core of it, and the reason why pressure on education is the government doesn't really want the public to know, because if they did know and understand what was going on, there would be big changes. I have doubts about a new party. There's a Socialist Party, Socialist Labour Party, Socialist Workers' Party, Socialist Party of Great Britain, Scottish Socialist Party, Solidarity, Respect Renewal. We've enough Socialist parties, in my opinion. What we should do is meetings like this, where we bring together people of different experience and make it a form of understanding. And I'm old now, and the older I get, the more I realise every single generation has to fight the same battles again and again and again. There's no final victory and there's no final defeat, and therefore a little bit of history may help. 80 years ago this year, when I was 3, I was introduced to a Labour MP. Didn't see him again for 7 years. Next time I saw him, he had a black shirt in Parliament Square, and it was Oswald Mosley, who'd been a Labour MP and became a fascist. And I did meetings with my dad, broken up by the fascists in the 1930s, and I bought Mein Kampf when I was 11, Hitler's book, and one phrase in it stuck in my mind. Hitler said, "Democracy inevitably leads to Marxism." Now you work that one out. What he recognised was that if people knew what was going on and organised and had the right to organise, then things would change in a way he did not want. And the simple lesson, I won't go back to basics, but the truth is that this country and the world have been run by rich and powerful men from the beginning of time. Began with slavery. They owned the workers and the land. If any slave objected, he was flogged or hanged, and that kept them in order. And the only real wealth in the world is land and the resources that lie under it and the people. They are the real source of wealth. And until really quite recently, working people had no rights at all. In 1834, which is only about 90 years before I was born, only 2% of the population had the vote. They were all rich men. Women didn't have the vote at all. And out of trade unionism came the change. The Chartists, votes for men, the suffragettes, votes for women, trade union movement wanted representation in Parliament, Labour Party was formed, adopted a socialist programme, and that was the first real change. And of course, when the slump occurred in the 1930s, it produced, and I'm so glad the campaign against the BNP has been mentioned, of course, it was Hitler used the Jews and the communists as an excuse to get into power, and he said to them, "Give me votes, give me power," said Hitler, "I'll give you jobs." He did give them jobs. Put half of the unemployed in the army, other half in the factories, and there was another war, and we lost 105 million people in 2 world wars from 1914 to 1940. 105 million people died, and that was the price of capitalism and imperial competition. And then things did change. I know it's popular to have a go at the Labour Party, no good at all, but I'm very proud I was in the Labour Party in 1945, because if you look at our manifesto, it was very clear. It said the interwar slumps were not acts of God or result of strange forces. It was the direct result of too much economic power in the hands of too few men who behaved like a totalitarian oligarchy in the heart of our democratic state. They had and they felt no responsibility to the nation. And out of that came what we did, and I'm very proud of it. We introduced the health service. We were absolutely bankrupt, but we introduced the health service because that was needed. And we introduced the beginnings of the welfare state. And so it wasn't perfect. God knows it wasn't perfect. But you see, what that came out, and Lindsay made the point in her speech, the recognition that in wartime there are no economic arguments at all. I've never heard a general say, "I can't bomb Baghdad this month because I've exceeded my budget." In wartime, you do whatever is required. And we should adopt the principle that in peacetime, you do whatever is required. People want jobs, they want homes, want a decent income, they want education for their kids, they want health care, if they're unemployed to be protected, if they're old to be looked after, and they want peace. That's what people want. And the tests of a policy should be whether those obligations are met or not. That's the test. And you see, when you come to the Thatcher period, this is what's so interesting. Thatcher was a much cleverer woman than we give her credit for. She knew perfectly well the strength of the labour movement lay in three sources of power. One was the trade union movement. So she took on the miners, described these courageous and skilled people as the enemy within. For God's sake, what an insult to the people who built our economy in the sweat of their labour. And she introduced legislation that made trade unionism actually illegal.
Which is still there.
You can't be a proper trade unionist now because your rights are taken away. So what she said, and this is very clever, she said, well, you can buy a council house, so you'll be a property owner. You may not be able to get a wage increase, but you can borrow. And the borrowing was deliberately encouraged because people in debt are slaves to their employers. That's how the whole thing began. And that's why borrowing was a deliberate policy to make the working class today slaves again. And that's exactly what they are. I mean, many trade unions don't go on strike because they're afraid they lose their job and lose their home, and so that's what the policy was. She also attacked local government, which was the beginning of further education and education in schools and all that, and she destroyed local government. So local councillors now are just agents of the Treasury. They can only spend money the Treasury give them on things the Treasury tells them they can spend it on. They're sub-agents of a sort of right-wing bank. And she attacked the public sector and privatised it. And this privatisation is internationally. I met an old friend of mine called Kenneth Kaunda, who was the president of Zambia. I met him when he came out of a British prison years ago, before he was president. And he said, we had a great debt, and the IMF came along, and he said, I'll lift your debt if you'll sell off all your schools and hospitals to multinational corporations. So privatisation is a deliberate policy, along with the destruction of local democracy and the destruction of the trade union, to restore power back to where it was. And what we are now back in, that's what the whole crisis is about, the restoration of power of those who've always controlled the world, the people who've owned the land and the resources and all the rest of it. And that is something we need to understand. And just get it. When I hear the government say we want to restore confidence in the banking system, well, I must say I don't want to restore such confidence in the banking system. They do it all over again. Because this theory that wealth trickles down, actually wealth bubbles up to the people at the very top. And I mean, look at these obscene bonuses they're getting. What is it, the head of British Gas gets $4 million a year. Top income, I think, is $22 million a year for somebody in this country. And then perpetual squeezing down the line. So that's what I think we have to do, and I do think we should. And this is why I think this meeting with the direct experience of people from different sectors is so important. You mentioned the Post Office. When I was Postmaster General, I set up the Gyro Bank. It became the 6th biggest bank in Britain, and I tell you one thing, and that was without nationalising anybody. I tell you one thing, the Gyro Bank would have not played the game of the bankers in London. So what did Thatcher do? She sold it to Alliance and Leicester, closed it down. And that was because she was not prepared to see public enterprise survive even when it succeeded. And so what we have to do is to have a long-term plan in our mind. Mind you, the short-term battle is going to be a big one. But the longer term, all the banks should be publicly owned. And if you put money into the banks, the first thing you say to them is no more bonuses this Christmas. That would just be a start. And then see that the money is directed to help people who need to raise money for businesses or do whatever is necessary. Then all the public services, gas, electricity, water, transport should be publicly owned. Of course they should be. And actually that's not a difficult argument to put across. We're not alone if we say that. Tory former Thatcherite minister said to me a time we would go on a television programme, it was a catastrophe to privatise the railways. Well, if they think it, I thought Labour might have thought the same too. And I think these arguments, I say this to build confidence at the end, don't think we're an isolated little group. I go around the country doing meetings all the time. I'm engaged in a permanent by-election when I'm not the candidate and there's no polling day. And what really pleases me is the way the arguments you've been put tonight put into any audience, and you'd be surprised how much support there is. They don't want the war, they don't want privatisation, they don't want pensions and means tests, they don't want students saddled with debt, they don't want civil liberties taken away, they do want Labour properly able to play its role. So we're not alone. And it is very important to keep optimism. I think there's a characteristic of the left to be professionally pessimistic, and I don't go for that. I think progress has been made by two flames that have always been burning in the human heart: the flame of anger against injustice and the flame of hope you can build a better world. And if this meeting leads to more meetings like this, where we can exchange our experience and keep those two flames burning, maybe this is a turning point, but not for quite the reason that New Labour thought it might be. Thank you for asking me anyway, and if I got to slip off.